when three rangers in Wyoming, Montana, and Washington all described the exact same thing, standing 8 feet tall, watching from the tree line, the Park Service stopped returning their calls. These weren't tourists seeing shadows in the woods. These were trained professionals. Men and women who'd spent decades in backcountry wilderness, who knew the difference between a bear standing on its hind legs and something that shouldn't exist. And when their reports landed on the same desk within 6 months of each other, someone at the Department of the Interior made a decision. Stop investigating. Stop asking questions. And whatever you do, don't let the public know. But the rangers kept talking. And tonight, you're going to hear what they saw. 3 states, 3 witnesses, 1 creature. This is their story. Case 1, Wyoming, Yellowstone National Park. Ranger, Thomas Hargrove, 19 years of service. Date, July 2018. Location, Lamar Valley, Yellowstone. Thomas Hargrove had been patrolling Yellowstone's northern range for nearly 2 decades. He knew the rhythms of the park, the way bison moved through the valley at dawn, the trails wolves used to shadow elk herds, the places grizzlies denned when winter came early. He'd seen it all. Or so he thought. It was late July, peak season, and Thomas had been assigned to patrol the Lamar Valley area after reports of a grizzly getting too comfortable near campsites. The protocol was simple. Locate the bear, assess behavior, and if necessary, haze it back into deeper wilderness. He set out before sunrise, hiking along a ridge that overlooked the valley. The air was cool, the sky just beginning to lighten. Below him, a herd of bison grazed in the mist, their massive forms drifting like ghosts through the tall grass. And that's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was another ranger. Someone else assigned to the same patrol, maybe approaching from the opposite ridge. The figure was tall, unusually tall, but from a distance it could have been a man in a heavy pack. Thomas raised his binoculars. The figure stood at the edge of the tree line, maybe 300 yards across the valley, motionless, facing his direction. He adjusted the focus. Not a ranger. The proportions were wrong. The shoulders too broad, the arms too long, hanging almost to the knees. And the height. Thomas had been around enough tall men to recognize when something exceeded normal human scale. This thing was massive, 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall. He lowered the binoculars, blinked, raised them again. Still there. It hadn't moved, just stood there, partially obscured by the trees, watching the valley, watching him. Thomas felt his pulse quicken. He keyed his radio. Hargrove to dispatch. I've got a visual on something unusual in Lamar Valley. Requesting backup for possible wildlife identification. Static crackled. Then a voice. Copy that, Hargrove. What's the species? He hesitated. Unknown. Large bipedal figure, approximately 8 feet tall, standing at the tree line near Cache Creek. A pause. Say again. Large, bipedal, not a bear, not human. Another pause. Stand by. Thomas kept his eyes on the figure. It still hadn't moved. The bison below continued grazing, undisturbed. If it had been a bear, they would have scattered by now. Bison don't tolerate grizzlies near their calves. But they weren't reacting to this. He decided to get closer. Moving carefully along the ridge, Thomas descended toward the valley floor, keeping the tree line in sight. His hand drifted to the canister of bear spray on his belt, more out of instinct than confidence. Whatever he was looking at, bear spray felt inadequate. As he reached the valley floor and started to cross the open ground, the figure moved. Not away. Toward him. It stepped out from the trees, one long, deliberate stride, and Thomas stopped cold. In full daylight now, there was no mistaking it. This was no bear, no elk. No trick of shadow or distance. It was humanoid. Covered in dark brown fur, matted and thick. The head sat low on massive shoulders, almost necklace. The arms hung long and powerful, swinging slightly as it took another step forward. And it was looking directly at him. Thomas's throat went dry. Every instinct told him to run, but he forced himself to stay still. Movement triggered predators. He knew that. Stay calm. Don't run. The figure took another step, then stopped. They stood there, maybe 50 yards apart, staring at each other across the misty valley. Thomas's radio crackled. "Hargrove, backup is en route. What's your status?" He couldn't answer, couldn't move. His hand was frozen on the radio, his eyes locked on the creature, and then it did something that made his blood run cold. It tilted its head. Slowly, deliberately, like it was studying him, trying to understand what he was. Thomas whispered into the radio, It's watching me." "Hargrove, say again?" The creature took one more step. Then, without warning, it turned and walked back into the trees. Not running, not hurried, just leaving, as if it had seen enough. Thomas stood there for another 5 minutes, heart pounding, waiting for it to reappear. It didn't. When backup arrived 20 minutes later, Thomas led them to the tree line. They found tracks, deep impressions in the soft soil near the tree line, barefoot, human-shaped, but far too large, 16 inches long, 5 toes, a clear heel strike. They photographed everything, took measurements, filed the report. 3 weeks later, Thomas received a call from a supervisor in the regional office. The message was brief. "Your report has been reviewed. No further action required. Do not discuss this incident with the public or media." When Thomas pushed back, asking what they determined the creature was, the supervisor's response was blunt. "There was no creature. You saw a bear." End of discussion. Thomas Hargrove retired. 2 years later, he never patrolled Lamar Valley again. Case 2. Montana, Glacier National Park. Ranger Sarah Kleinfeld, 14 years of service. Date, October 2018. Location, Many Glacier area. Sarah Kleinfeld loved the fall. October in Glacier was her favorite time of year. Fewer tourists, crisp air, the larches turning gold against the sharp peaks. It was the season when the park felt like it belonged to the rangers again. She'd been assigned to close down backcountry campsites for the winter, a routine task she'd done dozens of times. Hike in, inspect the sites, remove any debris, mark them as closed on the maps. This particular site sat near Iceberg Lake, a remote spot that required a 4-mile hike through dense forest and alpine meadows. Sarah set out mid-morning, her pack light, her mood easy. She expected to be back by early afternoon. The trail was empty. The last backpackers had cleared out weeks ago, and the approaching winter kept day hikers away. She had the forest to herself. Or so she thought. About 2 miles in, Sarah noticed the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of a forest at rest, but the wrong kind of silence. The kind where birds stop singing, where squirrels stop chattering, where even the wind seems to hold its breath. She paused, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. She kept walking, but slower now, more alert. The trail climbed through a stand of old-growth fir, their trunks massive and dark, the canopy so thick it blocked most of the sunlight. Sarah felt the temperature drop, felt the weight of the shadows pressing in. And then she smelled it, a thick, pungent odor, musky and sour, like wet fur mixed with decay. She'd smelled bear before, countless times, but this was different, sharper, more organic. It clung to the air like a fog. Sarah stopped and pulled the bear spray from her belt. "Hey, bear!" she called out, her voice echoing through the trees. "Making noise? Coming through?" No response, just that oppressive silence. She continued up the trail, moving carefully, scanning left and right. The smell grew stronger, and then she saw the tracks, fresh impressions in the soft earth, leading away from the trail and deeper into the forest. Barefoot. Humanoid, but massive. Easily 17 inches long, far wider than any human foot. Sarah crouched down, studying them. 5 toes, a pronounced arch, heel strike. These weren't bear tracks. Bears didn't walk like this. She pulled out her camera and took photos, her hands steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. That's when she heard the breathing. Heavy. Rhythmic. Close. She stood slowly, heart pounding, and turned toward the sound. 30 feet into the trees, partially obscured by a massive fir trunk, something stood watching her. Sarah froze. It was enormous. 8 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dark reddish-brown fur. The body was humanoid but far more muscular, the chest broad and powerful. The arms hung low, thick and ape-like. And the face... Sarah couldn't make out details. The shadows were too deep. But she could see the eyes, pale, reflective, fixed on her with an intelligence that made her stomach drop. It wasn't just looking at her. It was assessing her. She forced herself to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm leaving. I'm backing away now." The creature didn't move. Sarah took one slow step backward, then another. The creature tilted its head, just slightly, the same way a dog might when trying to understand a sound. She kept backing up, eyes locked on the figure, until she reached a bend in the trail. Only then did she turn and walk, quickly, but not running, back down the path. She didn't stop until she reached the trailhead. When she filed her report that evening, she included the photos of the tracks, a detailed description of the encounter, and a recommendation that the area be temporarily closed for large predator activity. 2 days later, she received an email from the park superintendent. The photos had been reviewed by wildlife biologists and determined to be elk tracks distorted by erosion. Her encounter was officially classified as a possible grizzly sighting at distance, Sarah replied, attaching zoomed-in photos of the tracks, pointing out the clear-toe structure, the arch, the bipedal gait pattern. She never received a response. Case 3. Washington, North Cascades National Park. Ranger, Marcus Webb, 22 years of service. Date, December 2018. Location, Thunder Creek Trail. Marcus Webb had been with the Park Service longer than most. 22 years. All of them in the North Cascades. All of them in backcountry patrol. He'd worked through blizzards, avalanches, search and rescue operations that lasted days. He was the kind of ranger younger staff looked up to. Steady, knowledgeable, unshakable. Until December 2018. It was early winter, and Marcus had been assigned to check a remote cabin used by rangers during summer patrols. The cabin sat 8 miles up Thunder Creek Trail, deep in wilderness where cell service didn't exist, and the nearest road was a day's hike away. He set out at dawn, alone, carrying supplies to winterize the cabin. The forecast called for snow later in the week, and once the passes closed, the cabin would be inaccessible until spring. The hike in was uneventful. The trail was frozen, the creek iced over in places, the forest silent under a low gray sky. Marcus moved efficiently, his breath misting in the cold air. He reached the cabin by early afternoon and got to work, boarding up windows, checking the roof, securing supplies inside. The light was already fading by the time he finished, the sun dropping behind the jagged peaks to the west. Marcus debated staying the night, but decided against it. He had a headlamp, and he knew the trail well enough to hike out in the dark. He started back down the trail just as twilight settled over the forest. That's when he heard the knocking. Wood on wood. Distant, but distinct. 3 sharp raps, echoing through the trees. Marcus stopped, listening. Silence. Then another knock. Closer this time. He frowned. There shouldn't be anyone else out here. The area was closed for the season. "Hello," he called out. "Anyone there?" No response. He kept walking, faster now, his hand resting on the flashlight clipped to his belt. The knocks continued, following him. Always just out of sight, always shifting position. Sometimes ahead, sometimes to the side, sometimes behind. And then the footsteps started, heavy, deliberate, crunching through frozen underbrush parallel to the trail. Marcus stopped again, turning his headlamp toward the sound. The beam cut through the dark forest, illuminating bare trunks and tangled branches. Nothing moved. "I'm a park ranger," he called out, his voice firm. "Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched for 10, 15 seconds. Then, from the darkness just beyond the reach of his headlamp, a low sound rumbled through the trees. Not a growl, not quite a vocalization, something in between, deep, guttural, resonating in Marcus's chest. His hand moved to the bear spray on his belt, and then it stepped into the light. For a fraction of a second, Marcus's brain refused to process what he was seeing. It was too large, too impossible, too wrong. 8 feet tall, maybe more, covered in dark, shaggy fur, arms that hung nearly to its knees. A face that was almost human, but not flatter, more ape-like, with a pronounced brow and eyes that caught the light and reflected it back like an animal's. It stood 20 feet away, just at the edge of the headlamp's beam, staring at him. Marcus didn't move, didn't breathe. The creature took one step forward, then stopped. They stood there, locked in place, the frozen forest silent around them. And then, slowly, deliberately, the creature raised one massive arm and pointed. Not at Marcus. Down the trail. Toward the way out. Marcus understood. Leave. He didn't need to be told twice. He backed away slowly, keeping his light on the creature, until he'd put 50 feet between them. Only then did he turn and walk. Quickly, steadily, fighting the urge to run. The footsteps didn't follow. Marcus made it back to the trailhead just after midnight, shaking from cold and adrenaline. He sat in his truck for an hour, trying to process what he'd seen. The next morning he filed a detailed report. He described the encounter, the creature's size. The way it had pointed him away, he requested a follow-up investigation. 3 weeks later, he received a letter from the regional office. It thanked him for his years of service, it acknowledged his report, and it strongly recommended he take early retirement, effective immediately, with full benefits. The letter didn't mention the creature, didn't explain why retirement was being suggested. It simply offered him a way out. Marcus took it. 3 rangers, 3 states, 6 months apart, Wyoming, Montana, Washington. None of them knew each other. None of them had communicated before filing their reports. And yet, their descriptions matched almost perfectly. 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur, bipedal, watching from the tree line, showing intelligence far beyond any known animal. When a researcher compiled these reports years later and tried to request the original files through a Freedom of Information Act request, they were told the documents had been lost during a server migration. The photographs Thomas took? Gone. Sarah's track castings? Never logged into evidence. Marcus's detailed report? Classified under an obscure subsection of internal Park Service protocols that makes it inaccessible to the public. But the rangers themselves? They're still out there, still talking, still comparing notes, and they'll all tell you the same thing. Something lives in those mountains. Something the Park Service doesn't want you to know about. Not because it's dangerous, but because acknowledging it would mean admitting they have no idea what it is, or how many of them are out there. The creature didn't attack any of these rangers, didn't chase them, didn't threaten them. It just watched. And when it had seen enough, it left, as if to say, "We know you're here, and we're letting you stay, for now."